Hey guys, welcome back to another installment of Cubase Ninja. Hope you guys are finding the information useful. I know I'm starting from scratch, so for some of you who've been using the program for a while, you know, this may be stuff that you already know. But I hope to basically be able to get people who maybe just purchased the Cubase or maybe got a light version that came along with their audio hardware, just to get you up and running. And then as time goes on, we'll get into some of the more advanced techniques that you can do with Cubase and your music production. What I want to cover today is the types of tracks that you're going to find yourself most often creating and working with. In Cubase, to create an audio track or a Midi track or some type of track, there's a couple of ways to do it, as there are with most things, a couple of ways to do most things, depending on how you prefer to work. The first thing that you can do is up here in the project menu. If you go to add track, which is the very top of the list, you have the entire list here of types of tracks that you can add. And I want to talk today about these first three here, and we may have a look at these in the next episode. So that's one way to do it. So if I want to add an audio track, I've got a microphone plugged into input 1, for example, and I want to record something off of that microphone. The way I would do that is simply add an audio track here from the project menu. What happens, a dialog box will come up here, and it's going to ask me for a little bit of information as to what type of track I want to create. So I can actually browse here. If I hit the browse button, that actually brings up all of my track presets that Cubase ships with. And this is a great way to sort of create a track that already has effects and so forth on it, that may, you know, get you halfway down the track in the form of a template type of thing. So I very seldom use the track presets, but they're there, and I recommend that you explore them because you may stumble upon some neat sounds. So I'll just close that up for the time being. The next thing in the list here is the count. So I'm able to add more than one track at a time. If I know I'm going to need 8 tracks for the drum kit, then I can just simply bump this up to an 8 or whatever the case may be. So that's the track count. How many do you want to add? The other thing is configuration. Do I want this track to be a mono track or a stereo track? Or there's some of these surround sound options that you'll probably seldom use unless you're doing some stuff for video. So we're going to focus today just on mono and stereo. Now this brings up an interesting point that I get asked about a lot in the work that I do, and that is if you are going to be recording a single source, like a single microphone or a single guitar track or what have you, you definitely want to choose a mono track. Now, where the confusion comes is a lot of people think that mono means like, well, we want our music to be in stereo. We've got 2 speakers. We want our music to be in stereo. So why would I choose a mono track? Bear in mind that this option here is not the playback. You're not going to be listening to your entire mix in mono when after you've got all your tracks in and recorded. This is the input, not the output. So this is a mono input source, meaning only one physical connection, not left and a right. So if you've got like a keyboard, for example, that has left and right outputs, you can actually plug into, say, inputs 1 and 2, for example, in which case you would then choose a stereo track. But if it's a single microphone, a single instrument connection, or what have you, then make sure you choose a mono track. If you don't, if you choose a stereo track and record a mono source, then that sound is only going to come out one speaker. You're going to notice because the stereo track is listening to 2 inputs and you're only plugged into one of them, so you're only going to hear the playback out of one speaker. So, basically that's after you've chosen your track count, you've chosen your configuration, you can simply hit add a track. So I'm going to create one mono track right now, and there's my audio track. Okay, now I can double click here where it says audio 1 and give it a name. I'll just call it, say, vocal, for lack of anything better. And I've got an audio track. By default, it is already record enabled, so it's ready to accept information if I hit record. The one critical thing you don't want to forget about is now that we've created an audio track, we have to tell Cubase which input we want that audio track to listen to. So right now I have no, I just have a stereo input set up in my VST connections. If you're not familiar with how to set up your VST connections, check out Cubase Ninja Part 2 because that's the topic that we covered in that episode. So right now I've chose, by default, it will choose stereo input left, which in most cases means your input number 1 of your audio interface. Of course, that depends on how you've got your VST connections configured. Okay. Okay, so make sure though, if you're plugged into input 2 or aka stereo input right, that you change it to that, because you're going to hit record, you're going to be singing away, and it's not going to be recording anything. So just choose the input. Okay. Another way we can add an audio track, instead of going to the project menu, we can simply right click or control click on a Mac in this area here, and it brings up that same list, a little quicker to access. So I'm just going to add one more audio track. This time I'm going to choose a stereo audio track, and I'm just going to add one of them, and I'm going to hit the add track button, and I'm going to call this stereo. Okay, and now of course I have one stereo input created in my VST connection, so it selects that by default. Okay, if you've got more than one, you'll have to go and choose which stereo pair of inputs you're going to be recording from. Okay, so that's the basics of audio tracks and how to create them. The next thing in the list, again, I'm right clicking in this area right here, is an instrument track. Okay, now an instrument track is for creating a MIDI track that is going to contain a software instrument or a VST instrument. Now Cubase ships with a few VST instruments, and there are a whole whack of third-party ones, very, very good, high-quality VST instruments to choose from if you're in the market for such things. But if you've got a VST instrument installed on your system, a third-party one, this is how you're going to access it. So again, a similar type of dialog box comes up. Again, I've got my track presets, so you can scroll through those and pick a ready-made template. You get your track count again, same as before, and this time instead of configuration, we've got VST instrument. So if I click here, it's going to drop down my list and expose to me all of the choices that I have available in my system. So you'll notice I have a few things installed on here, and some of these we'll talk about in the future: Omnisphere, Superior Drummer, things like that. Very, very good instruments. Now, by default, though, you will have Halion 1, most likely, and you'll have some of these synths. These are the ones that come with Cubase. Halion 1 comes with all versions of Cubase. Some of these things here depends on the version you're using. I'm using Cubase 6, the full version, and so I've got the entire suite. So I'm going to choose Halion 1. And I'm just going to create add a track. Now what it's doing is it's going to create a MIDI track basically for me that has its output being sent to the Halion 1 VST instrument. And this button right here allows me to open up the control panel, the graphical interface for that instrument. So this is what Halion 1 looks like. And if I drop down this menu right here, I'm able to choose presets. Now actually my presets aren't showing up right now, and that's an issue that I'm going to be resolving. When I upgraded to Cubase 6, there's a couple of my preferences got a little messed up, so I'll fix that up later on. But this is where you would generally find all of the presets that are available, and you'll see that there's horns and strings and drums and etc., etc. Okay. Now once you've got, in fact, because I have no presets, I'm just going to choose a different instrument. So what I can do, instead of creating a new, deleting this track and creating a new instrument track to pick a new instrument, I'm just going to go to the output tab right here and just simply pick a new instrument. So I'm going to show you, let's see, let's try Superior Drummer, one of my absolute favorite VST instruments. I use this with my electronic drum kit, and I'm going to put together a video describing and demonstrating that in the very near future. So look out for that at techmuse.ca or techmuse.tv. We'll get you right to the videos, and I'll have that up hopefully very soon. So anyway, this now is a third-party instrument. It's not part of Cubase. This is something that I got after the fact, and oops. See, yeah, make sure we got, yes we do, okay. So now that I've got the instrument up, I can actually, if you've got a MIDI controller hooked up, or in this particular case, an electronic drum kit does a great job, I can arm this track and it's going to be listening to all MIDI input sources, and I can record my MIDI performance there. MIDI is beautiful because you can edit it, you can edit almost any aspect of your performance in the MIDI domain. And we'll talk more about that at a later date. So that's what an instrument track is, and how you create one, and how you choose or change your instrument, anything that you have installed on your computer. And last but not least is a MIDI track. And if I add a MIDI track in the same way, and again what I did is I just right-clicked in this empty space and I added the MIDI track. A MIDI track is very similar to an instrument track in that it records and contains your MIDI data, but it does not by default have an instrument associated with it. And you'll notice when I check my outputs here, my instruments don't show up. These are my physical MIDI output ports that I have attached to my computer. I use a Uniter 8, which is kind of old school, but it works great to give me 8 ins and 8 outs, 8 MIDI ports in and 8 MIDI ports out, and that's a great device. I found it at a good price, and so I took it home. Now, so you might be thinking, okay, well, where does the sound come from? Because as you might be aware, MIDI is not sound; it's just statistical data that represents your performance. What note you hit, when you hit it, how long you held it, when you let it go, etc. Okay, so you need to send that MIDI information somewhere. So this type of track you would use if you wanted to, say, for example, use a external keyboard that has sounds in it. Say you've got a keyboard connected via MIDI to your system. You can, again, it's going to record from any MIDI input source, and I can say, okay, well, send the output out of my Uniter 8's port 1. Now, you might only have one MIDI output port to choose from. I've got a few. So now that physical output port would be connected to the MIDI in of my keyboard. So now when I hit play in Cubase, any MIDI data that I've recorded will then be sent to the keyboard and basically play the keyboard for me in the way that I've edited and programmed it. Okay, so this is a really good way to be able to design a performance for your actual keyboard in a fashion that's completely editable and get it absolutely perfect, and then you can record the result after the fact. And we'll talk about that at a later date. Now, another thing you can use a MIDI track for is, say for example, you have one VST instrument, but you want to be able to have 3 or 4 tracks all being sent to that same VST instrument. So instead of creating an instrument track, because now you have only one track feeding that one instrument, I mean, they're connected together, what you could do instead is go into your devices menu and open up the VST Instruments panel, which is also F11. Okay, if I close that down and hit F11, that toggles that up. So now, again, just like in creating an instrument track, there's my instruments right there, and I can choose which one I want to use. So I'll just grab Halion 1 again, for example, and now it's asking me if I want to create a MIDI track, assuming that I hadn't already. Now I'm just going to say create, so it's going to actually create a new MIDI track for me and label it Halion 1 version 2, because I've got one up here as well. Okay, and I can go ahead here and pick my sound and so on and so forth. Again, my presets are not there right now, so I won't bother doing that. And I'm just going to close this up as well. This is a folder that shows you what VST instruments you have activated. Okay, so now I can take this track right here, and let's say this is a drum kit, and I want the kick drum part to be on this track, and I want the snare drum part to be on this track. So now I can take the snare drum part, change its output to Halion 1. It now appears in the list. Okay, I can take the kick drum and send its output to Halion 1 as well. It was already there because Cubase did that for me when I asked it to create a track. So now I can have 2 separate and distinct MIDI tracks that can contain different data, but are all being sent to the same VST instrument. And the advantage there is that I don't have to have multiple instances of the same instrument running and sucking up all my system resources, yet I can have multiple tracks. So that's the basics of the main track types that you're going to find yourself using over and over again in Cubase. We'll talk about some of these other ones at a later date. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you haven't already, jump on over to techmuse.ca, techmuze.ca, and check out a lot of the information that I've got going on over there. Subscribe to the podcast, jump on the mailing list. I'm in the process of putting together a bit of a free gift for those people who decide to participate in the community. So I'll keep you posted on how that turns out. But techmuse.ca is where you will find everything that I do, and we will catch you next time.